Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all those tuning in for our lecture today as a part of a very different uh, uh, discussion which converges and converses on the dialogues of international law and tries to answer the moot point. Your interests might align, but at the end of the day, can you get a job in the field of international law? Our speaker today will at least attempt to answer this question by sharing his experiences on international law and the career path he has charted as a student of international law and a lifelong learner of the subject. But before I introduce the speaker, I would like to speak a few words about the Center for UN Studies in the Jindal Society of International Law. The Center for UN Studies is spearheaded by Professor Dr. Westlin Popowski. Professor Popowski has had the experience and the skill and knowledge of working at various universities and as a director of various programs, and especially the University of Peace in Tokyo. The center which he has created in Jindal University is an attempt to understand the United Nations and study the initiatives of the United Nations. The center over the past 5 years has hosted various speakers and activity and has conducted various activities under its aegis. Another aspect of the center is the Jindal Society of International Law, which was created only 8 months ago and was launched by Jose Alvarez of New York University. And the topic for discussion then was the Biden administration and international law. This was planned and perceived before the election result was announced. So, us international lawyers were quite hopeful that we'll have a favorable president of the United States in terms of international law and its engagement. In this same form of anticipation of international law, the society is created as a platform to discuss various issues of international law, cross cutting between public and private spheres of the subject. Our speaker today, Mr. Sudhanshu Roy, is an international associate with the International Litigation and Arbitration practice in Washington, D.C. of Foley Hoag. His practice focuses on investor state arbitrations, especially in cases involving the representation of sovereign clients before arbitration panels administered under the ICSID and UNCITRAL arbitration rules. Before joining Foley Hoag, Sudhanshu has also worked as legal advisor with the International Investment Division of the Department of Economic Affairs of the Government of India, where he was instrumental in drafting and development of the Indian model of bilateral investment treaties and the negotiation of several international investment arbitration agreements. Sudhanshu has also worked on investor state arbitration matters and domestic cases involving India's foreign direct investment policy. Prior to joining the DEA, Sudhanshu was an associate with the government affairs and trade policy teams at Amarchand Mangaldas and Shroff in New Delhi for 4 years. This is the kind of experience that a professor brings to the table today, and it is an honor and a privilege of the society, of the center, and of course, the university. Mr. Sudhanshu, welcome to our platform, and thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Ankit, for the lovely and warm introduction. You've summarized, so to speak, my career path, and so I have a very big challenge now to keep. I think we have a good participation, firstly, of a number of students. So I have a very big challenge now to keep everyone engaged, and sort of keep them engaged about my career journey until now, my educational and my professional journey until now, and also to answer your questions. I would like this. I think you mentioned lecture, the word lecture at the beginning, and I thought, I mean, my understanding of this exercise is more like an informal or a interactive session with the students, rather than a lecture, because the topic is so you know relevant for the students. And I think you mentioned that at the beginning as well, Ankit, that everybody talks about international law in theory and in practice, but ultimately, you want to get a job, you want to work in the field, you want to gain some experience in this subject. So my topic, I hope, is the things that I'm going to be speaking about, I hope, is relevant for the students. And I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have, and I would rather spend more time in answering your questions and trying to be as helpful as possible, rather than just attempt a monologue, which I'm sure you people must have had in different forums. So with that said, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. I think we have a very decent participation, and thank you to the Jindal Society of International Law for hosting this event. I haven't, many years ago, I think it was about in 2014, that I think I had a chance to visit the Jindal Global Law School. I think there was an event hosted by the Center for Trade Law. I think I'm not sure if Professor James Nedumpara is still at your university, but I think he was leading the center at that time, and he had organized discussion on various contemporaneous issues regarding foreign direct investments from China to India and from India to China. So it was basically a discussion on FDI from China into India. And I remember going to the university at that time, and I had an excellent interaction with the students and also your vice chancellor. So to be back after 6 years, although in a different mode, virtual mode, is I mean, I feel very, very honored, and thank you again. And I hope that everybody is doing well in the pandemic, because reading the reports from here in India, the pandemic situation is really worsening. And it's actually because I have family in India, so I am worried as well. And I'm sure you guys live there, and you have your loved ones over there. So I hope everybody is staying safe, taking care, and I hope we manage to sail through this together. So with all that said, now let me begin with what I really want to talk about. And again, as I said, this is very interactive, so feel free to just jump in, interrupt. You can probably send your questions directly to Ankit. I don't know how it works, but I would be okay if you just stop me in between and prompt and just stop me and ask your questions, or we can do that at the end of my very short presentation, which is what I'm hoping. So I'm just going to be talking about my background a little bit. As Ankit said, Ankit has given you a very, very short introduction about me, but I'm going to go into it a little more in depth and talk about my journey from a law student to the point where I am. And I don't claim to be at some very high peak. I mean, Ankit rightly said at the beginning that I'm a student of international law, and I couldn't have put it better. The practice of law is such that you're learning every day. You never stop learning, and I am a student of international law. But I hope by talking about my journey, everybody that is here on this lecture or seminar or event gains some sort of perspective and insight as to how to chart a career in international law. So that's the first part will be about my background, and the second part I'm going to be talking about some big picture issues which I think you're interested in, like some 7 or 8 main tips, or how do I put it, or things to do or things to remember while you're charting a career or thinking about a career in international law. So those are the two elements that is there on my presentation. I could just go on and talk about both of those things in continuous in a continuum, or you can stop me at the end of the first part, and then I'll move on to the second part. So let's begin. So I would preface everything, just whatever I say, I would preface that by saying that everybody, every student, every law student, or for that matter, every human being has their own path, has their own unique journey. So, just remember that, whatever I say is my journey, but but just remember that you are, you are your own individual. You are your own person. You have your own unique existence and your unique interests and your unique goals. So everybody's journey is different, and so is mine. But there are always things that you can pick up from other people's experience and other people's lived experience rather, and then chart a path for yourself. So just remember that. That's the preface that I would like to begin with. uh, I'll just begin before law school. I when I was in high school, I mean, I went to high school in India. I did my first law degree in India. So, I mean, I'm in this probably in the same situation as all of you. I always wanted to do something with social sciences, and I always knew that social sciences, public policy, international relations, these are the fields even in high school that interested me. And ultimately I chose law. But the difficult thing for us, and I graduated around I graduated out of high school in 2004. So the challenge at that time was, unlike you guys, was a lack of information. uh, so for example, when I was out of high school, I didn't know that I didn't know that there was these national law universities, because there was just so little information. In the internet penetration hadn't happened. There were no smartphones, there were no websites. We didn't have laptops. So I remember finding about law schools and finding about the admissions process of law schools through newspapers, and my dad helped me a lot with that. I remember for example, there was no CLAT, right? So there was no centralized admission processes. Every university had its own uh, admission tests, and to coordinate and to give exams for all of this was really, really tough. So I remember having a very challenging time, because I had to travel to multiple places to write exams and give interviews, because some universities like GLC, which is where actually I went in the beginning, had had an interview process as well before they admitted students. So that is what I remember about the initial years of my law school life. I actually went to GLC, as I said, but then I decided that. And then I found out when I was at GLC, believe it or not, I didn't know that there's something called national law schools. And when I was at GLC, I found out about the national law schools. And then I went to the National Law School in Raipur, which was just recently set up because of friends. My dad's friend's son used to study there, so which is how I went there. I went to national law schools. I was so grateful for that decision that I took at that time, because national law schools and even your university, of course, the whole concept of residential, legal education and legal education as this 5-year legal BA LLB course was so new at that time. And it was quite different from what traditionally legal education used to be about, which is like general 3-year courses. So anyways, as I said, I went to the National Law School in Raipur, and over there a series of events led me to the path of public international law and international arbitration, which is what I'm doing now. And those events included, I had participated in 2006 in a moot court called the European Society of International Law moot court on WTO laws. So ELSA moot, which is, I think this was 2005 or 2006, I don't remember. But we actually won the national rounds, or we were placed second, but we qualified for the global finals, and then we traveled to Geneva, and it was quite an awesome experience. And that is how I was introduced to it's not strictly international law, it's international trade law, but still that's how I was introduced at a very early age in my second or third semester to the concept of just general public international law and international trade law. And then we had a visiting professor at that time from the University of Vienna, who had come to teach us for a semester. You guys can look him up, Rostam Neuwirth. So he had come to teach us. He was also an international trade law specialist, But then again, he had a wonderful background, academic background in international law, and interacting with him and taking his lectures, like the way you guys do. I'm sure now you guys have much more exposure, and because of the pandemic, I think your society, this society especially, has organized a series of lectures, which gives you the exposure from different foreign faculty. But at that time, to have a faculty for 6 months, uh, which brings a completely different perspective on international law, was something unique. So that was then, and I did a number of other things, which I can talk about it endlessly, but I don't think that's worth the time. But I graduated finally from HNLU in 2009, and that was also the time of the great economic recession, the first recession. But thankfully, just before I had graduated, I had done a internship in this law firm, which I'm sure many of you know, Amarchand and Mangaldas. It was, I think, the firm has been broken down, divided into two different law firms now. But at that time, it was just one single firm. And I had done an internship in what was called the government affairs and trade policy or public policy team of Amarchand, which basically used to work a lot with the Indian government on general regulatory affairs and international trade issues. So I had done an internship just before I graduated from my law school, and thankfully they offered me a job. So I went into Amarchand, and as I said, I continued doing a lot of government advisory work while I was at Amarchand. Um, and in the course of doing that, in 2009-10, we did a whole project for the Ministry of Finance, Government of India, on bilateral investment treaty reform. I'm not sure how familiar you are with bilateral investment treaties, but that's basically what I do now, and what I did at that time. But just to give you a brief introduction, bilateral investment treaties are treaties entered into between sovereign states for the protection and promotion of investment. So, for example, let's say India and Singapore enter into a treaty that would protect Singaporean investments in India and Indian investments in Singapore. Now, how it does that is by conferring certain rights on Indian investors, or let's say Singaporean investors who come to India and set up a company here, okay, or set up, it could be, I mean, it's not just a company, but let's say a Singaporean investor wants to come here and set up a factory. So that treaty would confer certain rights to protect the Singaporean investors' investments in India, and would impose certain obligations on India as a sovereign state to recognize and protect those investments. The most important feature of these treaties is something called an investor state dispute settlement clause, which is quite unique in at least in public international law, because it allows foreign investors to bring direct claims against sovereign states before ad hoc tribunals constituted under those treaties. Because if you look at public international law in general, it's very difficult for individuals, right? I mean, even foreign investors are individuals, right? They're legal persons. They're not natural persons like you or us, but they are legal persons. So under public international law, it's traditionally been next to impossible to for foreign investors or for individuals to bring direct claims against foreign governments, sovereign states. But this is a mechanism, bilateral investment treaties, which grants them that. So that's a major part of my work. So just to cut the long story short, and you're free to ask me anything about bilateral investment treaties, later. But that's what I did while I was at Amarchand, and then the government of India started having all these investor state disputes, which is what I just mentioned, right? They had a number of disputes, and then I was offered a position in the course of advising the government on these issues. I was offered a position, and I joined the government in the Ministry of Finance. And that is when I think my career, so as to speak, took a very sharp turn, and led. I mean, the events led me to where I am at. I worked on a number of investor-state dispute settlement issues. While at the government, I also worked on bilateral investment treaty reform. I also worked on, India's foreign direct investment policy. Uh, you know, Also on domestic cases involving India's foreign direct investment policy. Um, at that time, there was also this body in the Ministry of Finance called the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, which was responsible for approving, foreign investments in India under the FDI policy. I think they've abolished the body in about 2016 or 17. It no longer exists, but at that time it was there. So I used to work with them. So I had a fantastic experience over there, and it is there that I started to really see how the investor-state dispute settlement system, how investor-state arbitration and national commercial arbitration works, and I got to know how the wonderful work that all these foreign law firms and foreign advisory bodies, intergovernmental bodies, international organizations such as the UNCTAD do. I had a chance to interact, speak at seminars, meet various people. And from there, I was there in the government for about 2.5, 3 years. Then I went to NYU. I had applied to, and I had decided at that time, just to step back a little bit, but I had decided to go to a US university for my LLM, because based on my experience working with all these foreign firms and in the Indian government in general, I had realized that there is a crucial difference in the educational and the professional systems, professional legal systems, so as to say, between the US and the UK. India, of course, you guys probably would agree with me, is very similar to the UK. But the US, I had realized is quite different, and I'm happy to talk about those differences in the course of this presentation. But that's where I decided. I applied to a number of universities. I was admitted everywhere, but then I decided to go to NYU. And one of the reasons, I think Ankit already mentioned, is the wonderful professors at NYU, including Professor Alvarez, who I had the opportunity to take multiple classes when I was there. So yeah, I went there, and then from there, I always knew that I wanted to work. I wanted to be a practitioner of international law, and the best way to practice public international law is, of course, there are multiple ways, and I'm happy to talk about them. But I got an opportunity to work, at this firm that I work now, Foley Hoag, which basically specializes in international litigation and arbitration. So there are two elements of the practice, as you can discern by the name. International litigation is, primarily litigation between states, state-to-state disputes. And in international law, now they could be before any forum. They could be, for example, before the ICJ, which is, of course, the principal dispute settlement body of the United Nations system. They could also be before the ICLOS, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. They could be ad hoc arbitrations, right? Because there are these several treaties or agreements between states which which mandate, which recognize an ad hoc arbitration system or an ad hoc court system as the basic dispute settlement mechanism under those treaties. That's one part of the practice. The other part is international arbitration, which, as I said, is primarily investor-state arbitration and international commercial arbitration. The difference between those two is that investor-state arbitration is based under treaties, as I said, right? So it's pure public international law, in the sense that it is the jurisdiction of the tribunal, or the jurisdiction of the dispute settlement body is based on a treaty between sovereign states, and we are dealing with issues of treaty interpretation and just general application of general rules and principles of public international law. And on the other hand, international commercial arbitration is based in international contracts, where there are two parties based in, or it could even be like international commercial arbitration could also be based between parties in the same country, but the but the basis of jurisdiction is contractual, and it also provides for setting up of a tribunal under. I mean, it could be an ad hoc tribunal, or it could be an institutional dispute resolution system. Between It could be between two private parties, or it could even be international commercial arbitration. Could also be between governments, because governments are also contracting entities. They enter into a number of variety of contracts. So those are the two fulcrums, or those are the two things that I do mainly. Uh, I also work a little bit on investor state reform, which is what I did, when I was at the Government of India. So we advise states on bilateral investment treaty reform, improving procedural and substantive aspects of these treaties. We also advise some governments on contracting. So, arbitration clauses that they negotiate, drafting proper arbitration clauses, so as to make sure that, there are no loopholes, and, jurisdictional bases of the tribunal's jurisdiction are adequately covered. So those are some of the elements of what I do, my practice. That is the first part which I wanted to talk about myself, my journey, the kind of work I do. Now there are some big picture issues, but I think it would make sense for me to, unless you guys prefer it another way, but I think it would make sense for me now to just take a brief pause and give the floor to Ankit and others in case you have any questions.
Well, let me start off by first of all thanking you for giving this overview of how you work now. So I just asked the first question, which sort of triggered whilst you were speaking, and it's really on a more larger scale, and it's a rather a general question. How do you understand or reconcile this relationship between the academy, the scholarship of international law, and as a practitioner of international law? Because unlike other fields of law or of even international law, there is a very strong hold or a very strong position that the academy holds in public international law, for instance. So what's your interaction with them, wherein it's a very theoretical approach towards international law, wherein you as a practitioner have to say, no, it's not how it works in reality. You have to
Yeah,
understand the different nuances. So how has that experience been for you?
sure. That's a great question. I can answer that. But Ankit, before I do that, one of the suggestions I have is, I see that there are probably 20, 25 participants. So I know you very well. Of course, we've interacted. But before the others ask a question, I think it would make sense for them to introduce themselves and talk, just a few lines about themselves, so that, I can probably answer their question or know a
Okay.
little.
Okay. I've got two hands which are raised, but I've also got a question in the chat box.
Yeah,
So perhaps you'll take the chat box first. I'll read it out for you.
yeah.
It's by Rudra. Rudra, well, since she's typed it, perhaps she can't speak. So, well, she's like me in terms of the educational background we have. She was my classmate. She was my classmate in the International Affairs program, and now she's doing law. She's a part of the 3-year program, and she's asked, typically, how much adversity do foreign LLM students face when it comes to finding employment in the US after graduation? Uh, that's question one, and then I've got 5 live
Right.
questions. So
Okay.
you want to take them? You want to
Yeah.
take them together, or you want to take one answer
No,
one?
no.
And
I
then,
think I'm going to answer your question. Then I'm going to answer
right,
Rudra. Did you say Rudra?
Rudra, yeah.
Rudra's question. And Rudra's question is typically, what did she say? Adversity?
What sort of an adversity do? Well, basically, she's asking what happens after the LLM, and how much of adversity does one face after the LLM in terms of looking for a job. So basically, how good is NYU? That's the core of a question.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. No, I mean, firstly, to answer your
I
question.
think I think you should also highlight. Sorry to cut you out, but you should also highlight the Fletcher Dons, as they're known, and how Fletcher works as an alumni, very strong alumni base, and how they help the others of the recent graduating batches to in terms of employment. And you see this culture even in national law universities here in India. Perhaps you can talk about your perspective on this, and we'll have the live questions after this.
Of course, yeah. So first, to answer your question, I think that's a brilliant point, and I was going to make it. International law in general is a very academically oriented field. I think you mentioned that. I mean, I would say more so, let's say domestic litigation or domestic, certainly transactional work. I mean, if you're doing like capital markets, M&A, equity, private equity, there is almost next to none academic. I mean, it's everything is based on your past experience. Like the last transaction you did, the last advice you gave to a client, and so you would just follow that, and you would you would just follow that model in terms of your next advice or your next transaction that you do in your transactional practice. In litigation and arbitration, I think there is a lot more academics involved, because you're going before the courts. Courts have a system of precedent, right? So it goes without saying that you're supposed to know all the case law, and that involves reading, and that involves writing. You're also supposed to know commentary, because you frequently use them in your pleadings. uh, that's not the case in transactional work. First, I mean, maybe it is in some fields, but in general, from my experience, it is not that important. So, and in international law, academics is academic experience, and academic qualifications. And I don't mean academic by academic qualifications. I don't mean like a LLB degree or a BA LLB degree. I mean, I mean by that, a higher education, like an advanced degree, like an LLM, or even a PhD or a doctoral DPhil, or it could be anything. A diploma is valued much more, because it's just such an academically oriented field. Uh, so that in my career, I frequently come across people who are academically accomplished and academically brilliant. In international arbitration, for example, to be a point to be successful, to have, like, for example, arbitral appointments. It is very important to be able to academically analyze the facts and apply the law, and write an opinion like a judge would do. So that requires uh, legal writing skills, and also oral writing skills, which are not as important as in other branches of law. So it is very, very important. I would say it is one of the most important things that one would do. And my experience in the US generally has been that people take academic qualifications and spending time getting those qualifications, as they play the law firms, or even other forms of organizations which practice international law. They place a premium on academic qualifications, which is not so much the case in India. Again, this is not a criticism of the system, but to just give you an example, in India, for example, you go to a law firm at the age of 24, 23, 24, and then you probably make a partner by the age of 31, 32, right? You practice for 7, 8 years, you make a partner. But in the US, it's very common, from what I've seen, even my colleagues at the place where I work, it's very common for, firstly, to go to a college, you get a 4-year degree. Then you do something like a pre-law, which you mentioned, people do pre-law, people do other sort of things. Then you go to a JD program, which is 3 years. Then it's really common for people to go to do another degree, do a PhD, do a JSD. So people are still studying, people are still getting academic qualifications at the age of 30, 32, 35, which is the age in India where, if you don't make a partner in a law firm, or you don't, if you're practicing as an advocate, if you don't have an independent practice by 32, 35, you're worried. So this is a critical difference that I've seen in the educational systems and practice in the India and the US. That's just my perspective. And that was in response to your question, Ankit. I hope that was useful. Uh, the second question was from Rudra, right? what challenges, what adversity do students face after doing an LLM. And I wouldn't say adversity. I'm not sure if adversity is the right word. It's probably a too strong a word. But yes, it is. It is a tough challenge. I mean, if you're an LLM student in the US, you are, for any sort of job market, for any sort of position, whether, as I said, whether it's a law firm position or whether it's a position in a NGO or in a other sort of non-governmental organization. I mean, you can get a government job because you'll have to be a US national or a UK national to get those sort of jobs. You are competing primarily against you know students who are graduates and brought up, students who've been brought up in the American legal system. So they've gone to a college and then they've gone through this 3-year JD. So it is definitely a tough challenge. Because of the nature of your degree, the LLM program is itself very short, right? It's just 9 months. I think it's the same in the US and also in Europe. So the LLM program is very short to really make, you can. I mean, I'm not trying to discourage anything here, but it's very difficult to adapt into a whole new legal system and legal culture in a short period of 9 months. But then you should look at the positive side of things, right? Because it gives you a unique and different perspective. It introduces you to new people. It's I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but the educational systems, the classroom, the classroom instruction method is completely different. For example, in India, we are used to, I was telling Ankit before it started, is based on a lecture method, but in the US, it's based on a Socratic method where where it's based on a one-to-one dialogue between the professor and the students' class participation. So you're exposed to these wonderful differences and wonderful new culture, and it's upon you to make the best use of it. So it is a challenge, and there are certain things that you can do to overcome those challenges. That was something that I had reserved for the second part of my presentation. So I think I will skip that part of my answer now and reserve it for the 5 minutes that I will address on the big picture issues.
Right. I've got five hands raised now, so I'll ask Shivang to go first. Then we'll have Prajwal, after that Vidhi, Simulpreet, and then Arjun at the end. Shivang, introduce yourself, please, and ask your question live. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Roy. I'm Shivang. I'm a second year BB LLB student who's primarily interested in human rights and international mitigation laws.
Can you say that again? International what?
I'm primarily interested in human rights and international mitigation laws.
Okay.
So what I wanted to ask you is, how many employment opportunities do you think are available for like us, for people who want to go into human rights laws and stuff like that?
Okay. And are you talking about employment opportunities in India?
No, I'm talking about employment opportunities outside of the country.
Sure. No, that's a great question. Of course, I mean, if I were to list the kind of opportunities that are available to someone who wants to do human rights, I mean, I would, we'll be talking for the next 2-3 hours, but, for sure, human rights is a practice of, is an element of international law, which is taken very seriously and which is, practiced at multiple levels, and multiple different methods of practicing international human rights law, whether it can be in law firms, whether it can be in international organizations, whether it could be in domestic organizations which seek to enforce international human rights law, whether it's before international courts or whether it's before domestic courts. Then the domestic, then the international tribunals and international courts, which actually are set up to enforce and apply human rights law itself. So there are multiple avenues and opportunities to practice that. I mean, even in India, for example, I know a number of colleagues who are now working in practicing international law and US law firms, but they started their career as human rights practitioners based in India. One of the people that I know, I think, he began as a coordinator for UNICEF, for example, in India, based out of Delhi. Right, it's a very basic level job. It involves, coordinating relief programs and coordinating UNICEF's reporting and research activities in India. This was a long time ago, but I'm sure those sort of jobs are still available. I know a number of people who work, for example, with the International Red Cross, the India Office of the International Red Cross, which is basically which basically works in the field of international humanitarian law, the law of war, so as to speak, with all these events happening, for example, in Myanmar and the Middle East and various other parts of the world. That's those sort of jobs are always available to people who are really interested. What I would say is that as students, it's always, I mean, of course, it's always good to think about these positions and dream big. But I would say that it's also important when you think about getting a job in this field to actually demonstrate your interest and demonstrate that you are a part of this. You're a part of this practice, and even as students, there is a number of things that you can do, which I'm happy to talk about separately. But you can work with. So just to summarize, you can work with international organizations, international tribunals, domestic NGOs, which are involved in applying human rights law before domestic courts. For example, in the US, we have the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is filing lawsuits left, right, and center to enforce human rights law, not just in the US, but also to enforce US's international obligations abroad. We have the Southern Poverty Law Center. Former colleague of mine from my law firm, actually, she left the practice here and joined the Southern Poverty Law Center. You can Google it and look up, as to the kind of work that it does. So the opportunities are unlimited. There's always the option of academia as a human rights practitioner. So yeah, there are multiple things that you can do.
Thank you, sir, for clearing out my concerns.
A very interesting answer. In fact, ICRC is a institution which will be discussed in one of our lectures next semester by someone who's worked in the department in the organization, and he wants to Sergey Sapp, and he wants to talk about the creation of an Asian courts for human rights. So again, you see this intercourse between academia and practice, and there is no other field which is as potent as international law, and especially public and private international law, where you see this. Right. I'll have so we'll have Shivang now, or no? It's Prajwal now?
Uh, Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for taking out the time. It has been really lovely to hear you. You just mentioned your experience regarding investor-state disputes, and my question was along those lines. So I had recently done the FDI International Arbitration mode, and by virtue of that, I was explored, I was introduced to the nuances of investor-state disputes and the few nuances of it. And by virtue of the mood, I kind of realized I do have an inclination towards that field, and it might be too premature, but while I'm exploring, I kind of feel this is something which I'm going to want to work in along the longer run. So I just have two questions in that regard. First, while there has been an improvement in the opportunities available in this area, specifically in India, but still not at a stage where with ample opportunities as, let's say, in litigation or the corporate field, it's still kind of a very nuanced area with very few firms having a great quality investor state disputes and working. So what would be your suggestions for having suggestions to navigating your career through investor state disputes while you're in law school in India, like any specific recommendations of internships or any other recommendations? And my second prong questions is kind of related after law school. So if so after law school, it is an international field at the end of the day. So how imperative it becomes to have a specialized investor state dispute LLM, or you practice first and then go for LLM, which is like kind of an age-old question, but just if I could have your thoughts on it, it would be great.
Oh, that's a good question. No, thanks for that. And congratulations on you said the FDI mode, right? Prajwal, right? So yeah, no, that's already a very good start that you've made, right? You've participated in that mood, so that's given you a flavor at least of what the investor state system is like. I never participated in the FDI mood because, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that sort of. I mean, probably I knew in the fourth or fifth year of my, but I never knew in the first 2 or 3 years because as I said, at that time the information we didn't have that kind of information available to us. So you already made a very good start by participating in that mode. Investor state arbitration is a field which is I mean, I would say it's really come up and developed in the last. It's not a very it's a new branch of international law in the sense that it's only come up in the last 15, 20 years, and it's really exploded. But it's also a branch of international law which is facing this huge legitimacy crisis in terms of the challenges posed to it by states. People are raising questions about the substantive content of investment treaties, and also about the procedural aspects of it. There's issues about conflict of interest of arbitrators. So there's also, so in the sense it's new, but it's also facing all these challenges. So it's a very interesting and dynamic field, and that's been my experience because that's what I primarily do. So just to, I mean, if you are really interested in investor state arbitration, and if I was in your position, I mean, what I would do is, firstly, take that as your, overall goal in terms of where you want your career to be. Sometimes what we do is, we get interested in something, and then as law students, that was my experience. You study, like in a semester, you study constitutional law, and you think, oh wow, this is so amazing, I want to be a constitutional lawyer. And then you study international law, and then you like, this is equally amazing. So if you have a goal, I would say that you must, and that was one of the big picture things that I was going to focus on. But if you have a goal, and that seems to be a goal, I think you should be really focused on it. And if that's the case, I think the opportunities are ample because, as I said, the investor state scene in India has really, really come up in the last 5-10 years. There are a number of domestic law firms in India which are now doing very niche investor state work, which is representing, I think, the government of India in investor state disputes before, ad hoc before tribunals. And there are also a number of firms, including, I think, my former firm, which are advising and representing Indian investors, who bring claims against foreign governments. So let's say an Indian investor wants to bring a claim against the government of Bosnia, which has actually happened. If you look it up, there's actually a case by an Indian investor against the government of Bosnia. So Indian firms are doing both, inward investment dispute resolution work and outward investment dispute resolution work, so as to speak. So I'm happy to give you a general, outside, because I don't think it's going to be very appropriate to talk about, go into minute details of what firms and what kind of work. But we can connect, outside of this. You can have my contact details. But there is a lot of work happening at that level. There's also a lot of work happening, I think, at the policy level, right? In the government, there's always room for internships. I think the Ministry of External Affairs in India, for example, because I have former colleagues and friends over there, they come up with regular internship opportunities in the legal and treaties division, which is basically India's in-house council for international law. They have a number of internship opportunities. Even law firms have internship opportunities, like that. And there is also a number of, public policy bodies which are set up to specifically advise and, do research and analysis of international investment law issues. So there is all these multiple opportunities which you can explore, but just remember to have that goal and then work towards that goal. So if, for example, you said you worked on the FDI moot, right? Now you also should, for example, take it up a notch further and, let's say write a paper, reach out to a professor that you are interested to work with, or interested to, or even a practitioner. I mean, don't ever hesitate to reach out to people, write to people, and, let them know about your interest. The more and more you, professionally and socially become involved in this practice, you demonstrate your academic qualifications, your scholarships, I would say the better chances of, of you getting a employment in this field. So I hope I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, sir. That did answer all my queries.
I think in short, the world is your oyster. And especially with the pandemic, the possibilities are endless. And this
learn from it.
Yeah, sure. I'll take your contact number from him and definitely try to connect.
No, I think from Ankit,
we'll have
organized so many lectures and reaching out to so many people. I see it popping up on my LinkedIn timeline all the time. There's a lecture happening here, lecture happening there. So you should you should just reach out to people and explore opportunities, as I said. And that if you just, thinking about a goal is always not enough. You need to do more. That's what I want to say.
You have to work towards the goal, and there's no better opportunity than having people like you to use to further your goals.
Yeah, no, you can use.
Okay, we'll have Vidhi now.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello, sir. So I'm from the second year BBLLB course. And coincidentally, my first introduction to international law was also through ELSA because I'm giving it this year. My regional rounds are in 10 days. And I'm actually pretty interested in WTO law because of ELSA. And my question was very similar to Prajwal, which is regarding how to grow in the field. But obviously, you've answered that. I also wanted to know if in the field of WTO law, what kind of LLMs should I look at? And if LLM is something in this competitive world now is something that's extremely necessary in WTO law.
Yeah, no, that's again very good question. Thanks for that. Don't ask me for tips on the ELSA because it happened a long time back and I don't remember anything about it. So tips on that. I don't even remember what we did and how we qualified for the international rounds. But no, that's again a good question. And again, trade law is more like investment law because it's also something that I think the WTO was set up in 95, 96. So it's also a body of law which is not very old, but again, it's facing WTO, as probably if you've really worked in this field, is facing a number of crises, number of challenges from states as to the relevance of these, trade integration and elimination of tariffs. A number of protectionist governments have cropped up around the world, which now believe in trade protectionism, which is the opposite of what WTO stands for. So in that sense, it's facing a huge legitimacy crisis, and I hope that it overcomes it because certainly it fulfills a useful role in international law. So yeah, again, the advice would be similar, but the critical difference between I think WTO law and international investment law, at least in the US, is that if you want to practice international trade law, pure international trade law, everything is based mostly out of Europe. So the US law firms in general, they don't have a heavy emphasis on the practice of international trade law. Of course, there is the US trade law enforcement of, let's say, US anti-dumping rules, US safeguard rules, and things like that. So in that sense, there is a practice in the US, but since the WTO is a European institution, the dispute settlement body is also based in Geneva. So a lot of the practice, even for American firms, is based out of Europe. And so you would be advised well to focus on Europe as if you really want to work in that field as your sort of your base or your destination. Now, I know a number of Indian firms also advise, the Indian government, specifically the trade policy division of the Department of Commerce, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, on WTO disputes and trade law advisory issues. But a lot, as I said, a lot of the practice happens in Europe. And again, there are a number of good universities. The World Trade Institute in Bern. I mean, I know, a lot of people who went there, had fantastic experience over there. Got to know professors, and converted that LLM opportunity, LLM program into an internship at the WTI and the other relevant trade bodies that are based in Europe, and specifically in Geneva. There was a former colleague of mine in Amarchand. He used to practice Indian domestic trade law. As I said, India has its own anti-dumping rules and policies, so he used to do anti-dumping and safeguards. Then he went and did an LLM from MIDS, the program at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And then he did an internship at the WTO appellate body. And then I think he worked at he converted that internship opportunity into a job. Again, it's, I don't know the specifics of how he got the job, but I'm sure it was through, when he went for the LLM, he got in touch with people. He had already had a, fantastic background in trade law in general because of his, 7 or 8 year experience in India of practicing international trade law as a Indian domestic lawyer. So I'm sure he spoke with people, he spoke with professors who introduced him with the relevant people. He worked for the appellate body, I think, for 5 or 6 years. And now actually he's joined the Department of Trade of the UK government because, they have some positions that are also open for foreign nationals. So he's working now in London in the Department of Trade of the UK government. I mean, again, I'm happy to introduce you to him offline, and you can probably, ask him more questions. But there is no single pathway to this. But just as a caveat, as a US-based lawyer, I think it's I would just say that the US is probably not the best venue if you want to if you see yourself practicing international trade law in the future. Focus on Europe. That is.
Yes, so I was actually looking at Cambridge, and I was looking at MIDS, and it would be great if you could introduce me to your former colleague regarding this. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, just get in touch with me on LinkedIn.
Yes, I'll do that right away. Thank you.
I'll drop in the contact details if I'm allowed to do so.
Yeah, please. And just
get in touch.
Office email and also my LinkedIn. Okay, it's okay.
Sure. I will do that. And just before I allow Simar to ask a question, in fact, your contemporary Vikram Raghavan of the World Bank was speaking to us a couple of weeks ago, and he was discussing how the World Bank was created, and he spoke about the diplomatic interaction which happened between India and the then Bretton Woods institutions and the ilk. And I mean, this is something that I've also discussed with since Jindal, as a former diplomat who was representing India at the WTO. There is this important link of diplomacy also with international law and international relations generally as well. And then diplomacy becomes an important part which bridges your understanding and especially the history of international law and obviously international relations as well. So I just thought that since I have had the experience of studying all these things, that I should share this, and that Jindal offers an opportunity over there also in terms of getting acquainted to these kinds of personalities and of course others as well. Right, we'll have Simar now.
Yeah. So just to know, pause and just to take a brief pause. No, I mean, Vikram is actually not my contemporary. He's probably 8 to 10 years senior than me. But just I mean, since you mentioned World Bank, that's again one. I mean, it's not strictly international trade law. It's more international financial law, international financial regulatory law, I would say, is a more apt description. And if you're interested in working in the World Bank, I think, of course, then the US is a preferred destination. And actually, my former university, NYU, offers a fantastic opportunity if you're doing that, because they have something, you can look it up. They have something called the International Financial Development Fellowship. I don't remember because I didn't apply for it because I got this other job. But if you're doing an LLM at NYU, I think they have a collaboration with the World Bank and specifically with Vikram, because Vikram is also a NYU alumnus, right? So, if you go to NYU, and I think there is some preference given to Indian students in that, you can apply for this International Financial Development Fellowship, and that allows you to work at the World Bank that's a fellowship at the World Bank for a period of 3 months or even more. And most of the people that I know who've gone there have actually, stayed longer. So they've worked with the World Bank for an extended period of time. And that's, again, a brilliant experience to have if you're considering the US.
Simar,
Sorry to floor is
Yes, a very good evening, sir. Thank you so much for taking out the time and sitting with us virtually. So I'm Simar. I'm in my third year BA LLB course, and I have actually two questions. First of all, in your experience, you did an LLM after almost 7-8 years of having a job experience. So would you say that put you at a better position to score a job offshore, or would you say that it doesn't matter in what in what order you do your LLM and then you have a job experience and then you apply for a job offshore? And my second question is, how do you choose what country to do your LLM in? Because like for example, the UK, its legal system is very much similar to that of India's. Both are common law countries, but also, as per my knowledge, it is more difficult to get a work visa there and stay for a job in the UK than it is in another country, let's say Canada or I don't know, maybe US. So what factor do you weigh in more?
No, of course, those are very good questions, very relevant and relevant questions. So I think your first question was about the gap between your first law degree and your LLM, right? And in my case, I think the gap was 6 years. Yes, 6 years. So as I said at the beginning, my overall caveat is every journey is different. There is no formula or toolkit, as Ankit was saying. I think at the beginning, I have no. But I think if you're thinking about a career in international arbitration specifically, in a US law firm, I think it always makes sense to get some experience and exposure in India before going abroad, just for the simple reason that you bring with yourself a package, right? You bring with yourself not just a lawyer who has a law degree, but also someone who is experienced in actually practicing and applying that law degree in the real world. Because arbitration is it's basically litigation. It's a different form of litigation, but it's not too different from what a general litigation would be. So in that sense, if you're considering a career in international arbitration, I think my advice to most of the people that I speak to is that, it's always good to have some sort of experience here in India, because then you can, mold and shape that experience, take it to, a US law firm or a US organization, or, it could be even a European organization. And then, that adds value to your resume, right? It's always difficult as a fresh law student, unless, let's say, you get a training contract in a UK law firm, which I think some people do. But I think if you get a training contract, you rotate. You don't have one specific area of practice that you do. So it's always good to have that kind of experience. In my case, what worked, and I was going to talk about it in my overall big picture, but I'll just say it here, is that in international law in general, public service, and I don't mean public service, I don't mean volunteering, public service in the sense work for a public institution, employment for a public institution. It could be a government, it could be an NGO which works in the field of public law, is valued very much, because ultimately, what is international law? It is created by states, right? It is an instrument of or it is a field of law created by states to govern themselves. So this is a field where any sort of work experience with states is valued a lot. So in my case, I mean, I knew when I was in working in the law firm in India that, if I get any sort of work experience working for the government, and the only government I could work for was India, because, of course, like most of you, I'm an Indian national, that would be very valued if I go abroad, right? So that's what I did, and that's what I think weighed heavily in my favor. But I'm not trying to say that that's the only way. But then again, that adds value. You could work for let's say, as I said, the International Red Cross, which is international humanitarian law. But you could also work for, a law firm, let's say in India, which advises the government, or a government, a PSU, or a state-owned entity on international law issues. So that kind of experience is valued very much when you go abroad, and that adds substance to your resume in addition to your degree. So that's number one. If you're considering an academic career, let's say, I don't think having any sort of, not, it's again depends on the everybody's individual situation. But if you're considering a purely academic career in international law, it doesn't matter if you have the experience of working here, or you just directly go and pursue a career abroad. I would say the same for trade law, right? Because trade law, again, it's a practitioner's field. Your background, your work experience in India matters a lot. And most of the people that I have seen who get jobs abroad and who are successful in doing so have some sort of work experience. As I was mentioning in the case of one of my former colleagues in Amarchand, who actually worked there for about 6-7 years before he went to MIDS. So that's always helpful. The second part of your question was, can you remind me again? I think I spoke a lot. So
yes, Professor. It was how do you choose what country to do your LLM in?
Yeah, again, it depends on, in my case, I can just talk about my case. I chose the US because I knew that the UK is very similar to India. And in the case of international arbitration, if you know the field, you would know that the US is the birthplace of international arbitration, right? The Alabama arbitrations. If you read in the history of international arbitrations, you would know that that's where it all began. Between the US and the UK, there were a series of arbitrations during the US Civil War. So that's, and also I wanted to have a different sort of legal education than what I had over here, and which actually turned out to be true, because it's a completely different system, as I was saying earlier. So it again depends on the, there is no one set formula. International arbitration is practiced in the US, in the UK, in Europe, all these places. But what I would say is that you must focus, on a market. Like, if you're talking about international arbitration, you should focus, let's say, on London. So if you're going, if you're going to the UK, you should focus on universities that offer you practical opportunities to, work, or, interact with law firms, or interact with professors. So, for example, the Queen Mary University in London, the King's College in London, LSE, or even, not so much Oxford and Cambridge. Cambridge, yeah, but I don't know so much about Oxford. But, choose what you want to do, and then focus on that particular market. So if you want to focus on the UK, that is the market. If you want to focus on, the Europe, I think MIDS in Geneva, the WTI in Bern. I think there's a separate LLM program by the Geneva University, is very held in very high regard. There are now these universities that has come up, not come up, but even French universities based in Paris are offering, LLM programs in English. And Paris is an amazing market for international commercial arbitration. And a number of Indian people that I know, Indian law graduates, work now in Paris. There's also the University of Oslo, which has, a fantastic program and a center for international dispute settlement. So that's the kind of market. In the US, I would say, if you're going to the US, it's always good to focus on, again, a particular, city. So DC and New York in the US, these are the hubs for practice of international law and international arbitration for obvious reasons. So, most of the people that I know have either gone to university that are based in DC or in New York. Of course, Harvard and Yale are also, sort of based nearby because it's not very far, right? It gets it's barely an hour or 2 hours from Yale to New York and about 3 hours from Boston to New York. So they're also located in close proximity. So most of the people that I know have, targeted a specific market, gone over there, and then, pursued opportunities over there. So, it's again, it's an individual decision, but yeah, in my case, I just chose the US.
All right. Thank you so much.
And also a number of you, I mean, as an Indian lawyer, you must also remember that, your Indian law background, your Indian legal practice background holds the key, right? I mean, that's what you're going to bring to the table. So you should look at markets where, there is this practice of, law firms have, let's say, India practice or Indian arbitration practice. They represent Indian parties. So a lot of firms in London, a lot of organizations in London, not so much in the US. In my case, it was different, but not so much in the US. Also in Paris, a number of firms actually. Singapore again is another fantastic market. They actually work and represent Indian parties, so they deal with Indian law issues. So you should know with your market and your skill sets, and then approach strategically these issues. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you, sir.
We have Arjun next. Arjun.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for your most valuable insight. So my name is Arjun, and I'm from the first year BB LLB batch. And my knowledge is quite limited to an extent, but thanks to Ankit and the society's initiatives, we've been, able to attend such wonderful sessions and webinars and increase our knowledge. So my question is quite general, and I'm leaning towards security, but I wanted to ask about your opinion on avenues in international law which have a futuristic outlook. That's it.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by futuristic outlook?
Sir, basically, avenues in international law which will be more prominent in the next 10-15 years.
Sure. I mean, of course, international health law, right? We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are dealing with international health crisis of unprecedented proportions. I'm sure you've come across this word unprecedented a number of times in your emails, and you're getting used to this. At least we are getting used to this word, but it really is. So if you're talking about the future, I mean, there are a number of relevant fields in international law, of course, there is the traditional public international law, arbitration, trade law, which has been there for a long time. But there is a number of fields which I think is going to become more and more relevant in the future as as we deal with the everyday problems of the world. And I think international health law is actually something that's going to be becoming a lot of the firms are going to be focusing, a lot of lawyers in general are going to be focusing their practices, because a number of countries are going to come up with regulations now in the future. I mean, not just to regulate health, public health, right, which is of course a priority, but let's say travel, right? How this whole pandemic has impacted the international travel industry. A number of colleagues that I know are actually now doing arbitrations dealing with international travel, right? Because there is a number of contracts which have been cancelled and contracts which have been affected by this pandemic situation. So a number of countries are going to enact regulations, enact laws in those fields, and as lawyers, I think we have the responsibility to interpret and help apply those laws in actual practice. So that's something that's going to come up heavily. I mean, I could talk about, there is just so much, international humanitarian law always remains relevant. The law of war, right? I mean, what law would you apply in a conflict situation, because conflicts are going to increase, in the future, because of all these humanitarian crises. I mean, in our neighborhood itself, as I was saying, we have this unprecedented situation in Myanmar, right, where a government seems to be hell-bent on persecuting and even ethnically cleansing its own peoples. So that's
something in the field of cyberspace, if you may.
Well, I mean, that's not something that I am, I mean, I can speak about it in very general terms, but I don't know how beneficial it is going to be. But yeah, of course, international, let's say international data privacy law is again something that is going to come up, and in fact, it comes up now because, as law firms, even in our practices, it comes up frequently, right? I mean, one of the things, for example, that I have to deal with now is the fact that in the US, we have these cyber export control laws, right, in the US. So the laws basically provide that anything that is export controlled, so classified information, that cannot be exported outside of the US. And in the old days, that was like, classified goods and like physical things, but now it's information, right? Because a lot of this information is stored in computers, in electronic form, softwares. So the US has this multitude of laws, and now we had to deal with a situation where we had to make sure that as a law firm we are compliant with the US cyber export control laws. So as in the sense that we have to make sure that any classified information we have regarding the US government or the US state cannot go outside the US. So, I mean, as a law firm, we are facing this challenge. So imagine, other companies and other private bodies which must be grappling with this issue. And, I mean, I don't practice in that field, but I know for a fact there are a number of my other colleagues in the firm do that kind of work. So it's always, again, going to be relevant. I mean, international water law, right? I mean, in a country like India, it's going to be a huge challenge as our population is always growing. But, we have, I mean, my family lives in India, as I said. So, we have all these water crises all the time. We have these, I think, river disputes, right, between India and Bangladesh. I think over the Tista River between India and Pakistan. I think we had the Kishanganga arbitration in 2013. This was over water sharing rights of the Indus River between India and Pakistan. So water is going to be a huge challenge. I think the Kamala Harris, who's the vice president here, she said, I think about a month back, that the third world war is going to be over water, right? I mean, oil is, of course, countries have fought a number of wars over oil, but I think in the future, international water law is going to be something that is, requires close study and close analysis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the insight.
We've got one question now from Mehek. Mehek, please introduce yourself, and the floor is yours. Mehek.
Thank you, Ankit. Thank you, sir, for this session. It has been so enriching, which makes me wonder a lot. And my question is, I intend to do my LLM in just a year because I'm in BBA LLB 4th year, and I'll be in my 5th year next time.
Hello. Hello.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, you said you intend to do your LLM, and then it got.
I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. So I intend to do my LLM in the US in the field of human rights and intersectionality. And I believe US is a great place for me because the origin of human rights and civil liberties has been very, very enriching over there. And it is still very persistent. And I would like to bring that back to India, especially with the kind of issues that we face, not just during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic. So, however, I also want to be in academia, but I believe that my growth right after I am done pursuing my LLM into academia will not happen very soon. I will have to pursue other sorts of jobs, and different areas of work ethics. So could you guide me on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very noble goal. I think you mentioned that you want to go to the US, study, I think, international human rights law, and I think you want to focus on intersectionality, by which I would say it could be anything, gender and law. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's a very broad term. So I mean, of course, that's a very noble goal, and that's again something that you can. There's a lot of opportunities in the US. You rightly said, international human rights is something that the US as an international actor doesn't take so seriously. I mean, if you look at a number of these human rights treaties, the US is not a party. So because the US always has this policy of American exceptionalism. But if you look domestically, right, I mean, in the US, human rights, enforcement of human rights is very, very serious. I mean, the Constitution itself is a living embodiment of human rights, the US Constitution. So the US takes internal enforcement of human rights very, very seriously. Not so much the international enforcement of it. I mean, of course, there are certain examples, but it's a great field because the domestic human rights practice in the US is very intense, and there are a number of organizations doing this kind of work. And yeah, I mean, I would say that it's you would have an enriching experience if you go over there, and then you were to bring back that experience over there in India. But I would say if you want to go into the academia, why just stop at an LLM, right? I mean, I would say that as I was saying in the beginning, in India here, right, we are too much focused on getting a job, earning money for obvious reasons, right? Because we have too many people in India, and of course, you need to earn money and provide for yourself, and support other people in your families. But if if you want to go into an academia, then I think you should focus on long-term, academic career, getting the appropriate qualifications. So the US has great opportunities in not just LLM, but also like beyond LLM, like I don't think they call it PhD, but yeah, if you're doing like something not related exactly to law, but because in law it's called the SGD or the GST, but it's the equivalent of a PhD. So you should think about pursuing a long-term, academic career in the US, and hope, and apply your LLM degree to even take it a step further. I mean, there are wonderful universities in the US. I mean, for example, Berkeley, the University of California at Berkeley being one of the most premier human rights focused institutions, at least as far as I know. I mean, for that matter, a number of them, but Berkeley just comes to mind because I know a number of people who practice human rights law and teach over there or are associated with Berkeley. And again, they have a very wonderful postgraduate, so as to say, post law degree program. It could be like a JST, or it could even be other sorts of doctorate programs. So I think you should focus on that, and then of course, and if you're doing this kind of work, again, getting funding, getting scholarship, all this becomes easier, right? Because you're not just, I mean, you want to improve society, right? You're working towards a bigger picture goal, which is not just about yourself, which is not to discount other employment, other jobs, right? Because everything contributes to the society in some manner, but here it's particularly noble because you're working towards alleviating the suffering of other people. So it's always, from my experience, it's always easier to get scholarships and funding opportunities and fellowships. There are a number of avenues that you can pursue in this field before you return to India. And of course, if you have those sort of qualifications, then if you come back to India, then you can it's going to be much simpler for you to get into academia.
Thank you so much. So this I certainly agree with you on almost all the aspects that we've discussed. But yes, I shall pursue my the reason why I felt that LLM should suffice was because in India there is this mentality that, oh, you're still studying. That backdrop that is there. It's you're still studying, you're not working, and you're 25. That's very demotivating.
I faced the same thing. I started working at 23, 23, yes, 23. It's just the way it is. I mean, your parents, it starts with your parents. I'm not trying to fault my parents, but even they were like, oh, you've graduated. You're going to graduate. What are you going to do? We had the whole economic recession as I said, at that time. And I think the situation is not too different now because, right, in India, but even in the US, I think, there is this whole economic downturn, slowdown. So yeah, it's that. I mean, I think you should just ignore that pressure. Honestly, you should look at some of the examples. I'm happy to send you individual examples, but I know people who've studied till 40, 38, 40, and then started working at in their late 30s or 40s, and it just works perfectly fine because I mean, because the focus of, I think, that's again a critical difference. I mean, the focus of not just legal education but education in general in India is to get a job, which makes sense. Again, this is not a criticism, right? You have too many people, right? Everybody needs employment, so it's a race. But in the US, it's more like focus is in building a wholesome personality, right? A well-rounded individual, so as to say, you know so it's not just about I don't know, exams and getting grades, which is what, in my experience, again, what Indian education was all about: getting high marks and writing a number of pages for every question that you're asked in the exam. But in the US, it's more like on your personality. So you are also, a lot of the focus is on speaking, right? In India, we just ignore that element. And as a lawyer, I mean, in other fields, maybe it works, but certainly not when you're a lawyer. I mean, if you cannot communicate your thoughts coherently, and it's going to be tough. So legal, and again, also legal writing, which is so legal. So oral communications and legal writing is something that's you will learn. If you study for a long term in the US, get your postgraduate law degree, not just the LLM, but you will see the changes. You will see what I'm talking about in that sense.
I couldn't agree more with you, sir. Thank you so much. Because if anybody asks me why I want to study further, I just say I haven't learned enough. There's just too much to know, and I know very little, especially about what I'm very interested in. And Ankit and all our entire society had a conversation yesterday where we decided that we're all running after marks and we're not turning into more wholesome personalities, like you said. So definitely going to the US and pursuing multiple degrees in multiple interesting fields should be my go-to goal now. So thank you so much for enlightening me.
No, of course. You're welcome.
We won't violate your human rights for holding it for very long. We've got one final question, which acts as a rather good segue to perhaps the last part of your discussion, which I think you wanted to also speak about after the question, but questions have run longer. So this question's by Faizan, and Faizan asks you, well, first of all, he thanks you for agreeing to do this and speaking to us, and he talks about his interest in public international law through the Jesuit moot. He also acknowledges the illustrious character in your law firm, Peter Zeng, who speaks all languages of the United Nations, which is a feat in itself. Faizan also asks, what are the activities, or what are the necessary well, I don't want to say tools, but I'll be guilty of saying tools, which are required for CV building for a successful application to any LLM program in the US. And he also asked what sort of financial aid is available to this. Uh, uh, you can share your experience as an answer to this, and we can have a couple of final questions after them, and then we close.
Of course, yeah. No, that's very good, and thanks for mentioning Peter. I mean, yeah. I mean, he's a very good friend, and of course, a wonderful colleague. And he does speak, all 6 human languages, which is a remarkable feat in itself. I don't know how he manages to do that, but yeah, no, he's a brilliant lawyer and a equally good friend and a human being. So thanks for mentioning him. But yeah, I mean, in terms of CV building towards your LLM, I mean, again, there is no like set or, Ankit mentioned the word toolkit. There's no such thing as such, formula that I could give you. But definitely there are certain elements that you can carefully think about and consider in terms of integrating in your CV. Just remember as a caveat that in my experience, I think US, when you're going for an LLM degree, I think what US universities in general is look for is for having a diverse, class experience. So your grades do matter, but ultimately what matters is, if what individual or unique perspective you're bringing to your LLM class based on your employment and educational background. So if you have something unique, in my case, for example, it was, as I said, the fact that I had worked for the government for 3 years and worked on these issues, which is not very common at that age. So remember to think about it in, like, again, wholesome personality terms rather than just thinking about grades. I think they do place some emphasis on grades. They do ask for your transcripts and things like that, but I honestly don't know how much of a factor is your grades and transcripts. I think the other thing is your work experience. I mean, in some cases, of course, people just go directly to do the LLMs, and they don't have that work experience. So I'm not sure if that applies to Faizan, but in case you don't have the work experience, I think you should be able to connect the LLM you're doing. I mean, right, you're doing an LLM for a specific purpose, right? So you have to write a statement of purpose. So you must be able to, connect your the objective of your doing your LLM with your background, right? So you must show some sort of, you can't, it can't be like, you're practicing. You've worked in, let's say, transactional secure. Somebody mentioned securities, right? So you've worked in securities law, you've done like 4 internships in different law firms, and then suddenly, you apply for an LLM in international human rights law. It's technically possible, theoretically it's possible, but that kind of switch doesn't make sense, so as to speak to. They have an admissions committee. So you must be able to connect your past background with your LLM, right? And I think they place a lot of emphasis on the statement of purpose, which is like 100, sorry, not 100. It must be like 500 words to 750 words. It's a 1 or 2 page statement that you write as to what do you want to achieve by getting this LLM degree. And trust me, the admissions committee, they read all these statements. It's not like you write something and it's discarded into a bin. They actually go through all of that. And as I said, the objective isn't getting a diverse mix of students in the class. So you would have some students with a transactional background, some students with a litigation background. They have, I'm not saying they have a quota, but there is only a limited number of students that they can get from India or from Brazil or from Spain or from Argentina or Canada, or so you have to consider all these factors in mind. It's a very there's no objective criteria, so as to speak, but take your statement of purpose very seriously. Make sure you write it well. Make sure you write it honestly. Writing something which if you don't have conviction in something and you write something which you don't believe in, it's very easy for an experienced academic person or even a technical person who does admissions in these US universities or UK universities to make that out. So take that very seriously. There is also recommendation letters. So some people, in my experience, they go to give to like a very high profile person or a family friend that they know, like a judge of the High Court or the Supreme Court judge, who they actually haven't worked with, but they get a recommendation letter. He may write like a 3 or 4 sentence recommendation letter, which again is not useful. Your recommendation letter should always come from people who actually know you. So it can be, your professors or your former employers. It could even be your school teacher, right? It could be really literally anyone, but the person should actually know you, know your personality. So these things are taken very seriously. Your grades are, of course, that's a factor, but I would say that's a small factor, of course. And then again, I mean, I don't need to tell you that publications and moot courts and these extracurricular and co-curricular uh, activities are also important. And again, to the extent that they are related to the LLM that you want to pursue, the specialization, so as to speak, I think it's always helpful.
Yeah, but I think what Fazan was asking was really well. He was asking about your journey from, well, in your case, NYU to then Foley Hoag, and how did that span out? Why wasn't it a Magic Circle law firm? Why wasn't it Freshies? I think that's what he's really referring to as in terms of how did you make that choice and how did that process go along. And I think the couple of pointers which came to my mind as you were speaking well, they were the following. See, as students, we're always told try different fields. I mean,
Yeah.
try and put your feet in different ponds to see which water feels lukewarm to you, which water is appropriate for you, right? But you're bringing up something different altogether. You're saying be focused, which is what, at least in my opinion, it makes more sense, because you should have a direct trajectory and the dots should connect looking backwards, not looking forwards, right? And my second point here was that um, uh, uh, even marks play, at least as far as we're told, is plays a very important role in your direction and how your statements are received. So perhaps you could touch about that also. And I see Mehek's hand is raised again, so if she wants to jump in here, then she can.
Let
If not, then
me take you up on that and just answer the
sure,
follow-up.
sure.
I think Faizan asked about my journey, and I mean, in my specific case, as I said, I went to a US law school, right? So it was natural for me to explore opportunities in US law firm before I, thought about the UK. Of course, there's nothing preventing you from going to a US university and working, and a number of people do that. But in my case, it just felt natural to think about working in a US law firm. What I did was, after my LLM, I wrote the bar exam, the New York bar exam, which is again a very intense exam. And that's one exam where marks do matter, because if you don't score the minimum marks, I mean, you're not qualified as a lawyer in the US. And it's I know that even in India now they have an exam, which wasn't the case when I graduated here. But it's unlike any exam that you have in India. It's again very practice oriented. I wouldn't say it's like super difficult or anything, but it's just different. So you need to really focus and study for it for about 2 months and just forget about everything else in your life. So that's what I did. After my LLM, I wrote the bar exam, and that helped me because I qualified, in the US as a lawyer. And once you qualify as a lawyer, it's always easier, for US law firms or other organizations to hire you, because you're basically licensed and equivalent to a JD. So that's something that helped. I always wanted to work there because, as I said, just the American, legal, not just the educational system, but the professional culture is like completely different. I was always attracted to it when I was working here in India, because I interacted with US law firms. I saw how they wrote their briefs in international arbitrations. The way the legal writing is like completely different. I mean, the focus is not, for example, on, filling pages and writing, multiple sentence, I don't know, 10-line sentences of multiple paragraphs. If you look at US Supreme Court judgments, I mean, just look at any US recent Supreme Court judgment and compare it with a judgment of the Supreme Court of India. I know there are some judges in India I keep reading who are increasingly focusing on brevity and the art of the so-called the more so in the global, because there is this whole, even in the UK, I think the focus is now on simplicity in legal writing, I think, which hasn't come to India, but there are some judges who are doing that. But if you compare, for example, how Supreme Courts write judgments, it's completely different. So I wanted to have that experience as a lawyer, have that sort of different experience. And that's why I chose the US. I mean, as I said, I was fortunate. So you cannot always also rule out, chance and luck and these things, So that's subjective, and I can't really elaborate on chance and luck here. But but yeah, I was just in the right place at the right time because the law firm that I applied to was looking for international lawyers with this sort of experience, and also the fact that I was already qualified in the US helped a lot in my case. Now, I think Ankit, you raised 2 points. One was the importance of marks, and the other was to explore different fields rather than have a single goal. And I think I mentioned that, I mentioned in the beginning in response to a question. I mean, in my case, just having a goal worked. I mean, I knew that I wanted to do international arbitration and practice in a international law firm, probably, in the final year of my law school, or let's say the first or second year of my employment in Amarchand, and that goal really helped a lot. So I think exploring different fields is always good in the beginning. So for example, if you're in a university, of course you need to study all the subjects, and you need to decide what your interests are. Similarly, once you join a firm in India, or lawyer's chamber, or for that matter, you can explore different things, different practice areas, different avenues. But at some point, you need to, because specialization is really important in this day and age, especially if you want to work in a law firm. So at some point you need to make a decision that this is what I want to do, this is what I want to focus on. And if you really pursue that goal with a singular focus, I think it's possible to really become a specialist in that area. And as to your second question, again, no, I mean, I was not trying to discount the importance of grades, and it's important even in the US for sure. But what I was trying to say is, again, it's just one component. It's not everything. It's one component of your personality, and perhaps not even the most important one, right? I mean, if you have like average grades and you are really good communicator, I think you can be a great lawyer, So that's been my experience with, colleagues and people that I have worked with. So that's in India, it's just all about, at least when I was studying, it was just all about marks and exams. It's not that I did badly. I mean, I scored good grades as well, but it was just very exhausting to just focus on exams and grades all the time.
Yeah,
Hello.
I mean, I can't agree more, and listening to you gives some sort of remorse to me because I stand over in the class ranks. So, well, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions here. So, uh, well, Fazan is thanking you, sir. So, and so will I thank you now because we overshot our limit, but we're we're thankful to you for staying on so much time for us on a Saturday, and sharing your journey and your path with us. This cooperation and this partnership between your firm and our society and university writ large, I hope will supersede and surpass at least my duration in the university, and will yield favorable and unique opportunities for both. We are grateful to you, Mr. Roy, for taking out time for us. We're privileged and we are thankful to you for doing this for us. And thank you very much, sir. Any last
You
one?
call me. I think I've told you before as well.
I'm so sorry. See, it's a thing which we've grown up. It's a colonial heritage, as we call it.
I know I had
great.
Again, I mean, thank you everyone. Of course we've, I think, short over, but it's a Saturday, so it's not, I have the time. So I had a great time, interacting with everyone. I hope I've been able to answer everyone's questions. I think, Ankit, you can go ahead and share my, office email and my LinkedIn address, and people can reach out to me at any time. And, I'll be happy to interact further and, answer any questions and help everyone. So thank you everyone, and all the best. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Grateful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.